You had a line in there about 5-6 minutes ago, I think, that really rings in my head because I understand why people say it, but it makes me nervous. And I believe it was, we need a common enemy or something like that. Okay. First, what did you mean? Like, if you could define that completely, because you brought it up in the context of China.
Sure.
When you say common enemy with them, and you mentioned we're like maybe in a Cold War with them, do you view that as we need to be able to have someone that we all can, or someplace that we all can rally behind in this country to not like as a whole, and then potentially have some sort of military conflict where we are victorious? Or am I pushing that way too far?
I think it touches on a lot of things. The first thing that it touches on, and I think is the people in this country are ultimately humans, and human beings are tribal by nature. I think it's very human to say, hey, we're in this camp, they're in that camp. It feels very good to feel very strong in our camp. I think regardless of what nation that you'll establish, that will always be a factor that we have to determine. Beyond that, I was not around for 9/11. I was in pre-K when it happened, so I have no memories of it. But I have heard people who did live through it talk about the atrocities of 9/11, but how incredible 9/12 felt
all the time,
and how immediately the same political divisiveness that is apparent now stopped in a day. And I hear the type of support and read history books about how people were growing war gardens in their backyards during World War II because we were shipping all the canned goods to guys overseas. So we had to limit the amount of canned goods that average American consumers were buying because of the war effort. I think, unfortunately, what would bring this country together tomorrow is a common enemy that we can all say, hey, despite our differences, if we aren't victorious, they're going to be. And if I want to have daughters that share an equitable world, that have the same rights as men do, we have to make sure that America and American values are apparent in that world. And I know, coming from a defense contractor, that sounds really biased.
Not popular.
Because it is. Okay? But that more than that, it's coming from a patriotic American. And that's coming from a person with my family history. And that's coming from a person who just sees the good that this nation has done. And what I think these things are that we're talking about, they're tools that the American government as a whole uses to accomplish all the things we're talking about. But you throw political corruption and human greed and just human bias and our flaws as men on top of it, and it gets messy.
It's very messy. No, it's a scary, slippery slope, and we're already down the slope. But you know, how far down do you go? The benefit of doing what I do, one of my favorite parts about this is the fact that I always have like a different person across from me, and I have people from all different types of backgrounds, political affiliations, and whatever. But there, you start to come up with some patterns. You know, we're on 140 something at this point with this, and you know, there's a line that Andy Bustamante had the second time I had him in here that went under the radar. Of all the things that people talk about in the comments with that guy, and his comment sections are hilarious. You know, people just claiming this and claiming that. I don't even know if I saw a comment on this thing he said, but it was exactly what you did. And he said, like, you created an enemy where we didn't need to have one. And so now you're saying that. So do you understand why people would judge that when they hear that?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is not exactly what you're saying. What I'm saying is when the world doesn't have an enemy, it gets lost. When human beings don't have something to rally against, they start finding things to rally against. So they subdivide and they subdivide again, and they argue about whatever. They argue everything from buy local to, you know, you're a bad person if you hang this sign and you don't hang that sign, or whatever it might be. They find reasons to subdivide. The only way that we all ditch all these subdivisions is when we unify behind one large enemy.
And he was saying the same thing you did. And to borrow his phrase from another podcast, he's like, I'm not allowed to say where I was stationed, but I'm allowed to say it was in Asian, and it was in Asia, and I speak Chinese and Thai, so you do the math. Right? So this guy gets that part of the world. And so I hear that, and I don't even have to put on a tinfoil hat, nor do I have to do it with you to be like, okay, well, that's interesting. now that's at least a couple guys who have publicly in my parents' house in New Jersey talked on a mic that goes on the internet to a lot of people to see about, you know, this concept that we're gonna, it's like you're talking it into existence. And, you know, I want world peace, but, you know, I'd like to marry the fucking head Victoria's Secret model.
Wouldn't we all?
I may not get that, right? So it's not like there's things that are actually attainable that we want, but I'd like to see less conflict than more. And when I hear things like this, I kind of wonder if there is these patterns of turning up the heat on purpose. I mean, shit, a year ago, China was one of those things like, oh, you didn't really talk about that. Now the whole mainstream media is talking about it like crazy. And I start to wonder, I'm like, am I missing something here? Or is this exactly what they're doing? Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.